that's kind of what parables are. They're analogies, they're illustrations. It's a direct correlation to how Jesus wants us to interact with him. You can make direct ties to a lot of those things as far as how we should behave, how we should interact, how our lives should look. And to kind of set some things up here, earlier in verse 24, there's a lot of talking about the disciples are asking Jesus about when he's going to come back, because Jesus has said, I'm coming back. And he goes on to say that, that nobody's going to know that time. And then it also follows it up with, to start 25, there's the parable of the 10 virgins, and that's also being ready for Christ's return, being ready for when you're going to be face to face with him. And then the end of 25 talks about the separation of the sheep and the goats, and then kind of sandwiched in here is the parable of the talents. So this morning I want to kind of focus on serving and stewardship. In this parable, there's a lot of teaching as far as our responsibilities to use what he has given us. And, from time to time, you see people kind of get maybe caught up in the spiritual gifts, which those are real things. But there are other things besides that, other talents, other abilities that we all have. And it's not just about always using our spiritual gifts, but it's, we also need to be looking at the ability and the talents that we have wired into us, and how are we using those. I cross-reference into 1 Peter 4:10, where it says, each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, to be the hands and feet of God, and showing his grace in its various forms. So, I kind of botched that a little bit. So anyways, as we start to unpack this, you can notice that in verse 14, it says again, it'll be like a man going on a journey. And there's a little note there that he says again, because it's just Jesus saying, listen, this is just one more way that I'm going to try to explain something to you. This is just another way that I'm going to try to make something obvious to you. You can, because of the direct correlation that we should be making with parables, the man going on a journey would be Jesus in this case. And as we start to unpack these things, I think we're going to see what was laid on my heart was 7 different stewardship lessons that are in here. The first one, we can go right to verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. So the first lesson is what we have is not ours. He says, it says that he entrusts his property to them. And back in that time, it was very common for wealthy people to go on these trips. And when they did it, they would, because they didn't have highways, because they didn't have the roads and the ability to travel like we do now, trips took a long time. So they had to set somebody up to get the newspaper out of the driveway, let the dog out, get the mail, all those kinds of things. But they didn't have the luxury we have today with, cell phones, smartphones, and being able to manage our own finances. When they went on a trip, they had to trust that their servants, their employees, would be able to manage and manipulate their money, their funds. And when they came back, they expected a return on what they had given over control of. And, like I said before, with the way travel was, even a well-planned trip was very open-ended. And there's no doubt in these servants' mind that the money that has just been given to them does not belong to them. It's their responsibility to manage it. It's their responsibility to care for it. It's their responsibility to make the best choices that they can with this money, according to who they believe their master to be, the man they know as their master. But they're not the owners. They're just the possessors. In Psalm 24:1, it says, "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." The rights, all of the rights belong to God. All of the possessions belong to God. All of the responsibility lies on us. God is the master, and we are to faithfully manage. You have to constantly remind yourself that you are a servant, and He is Lord. And if you allow basically just that basic principle to kind of really soak in, I reading over this, I started thinking about, my kids, and for anybody that has kids, it's really easy to think that that's mine. I helped create that. That child is mine. You feel a very strong sense of attachment, a very strong sense of responsibility. But you have to keep in mind that your children are not yours. They're blessings from God, and it's your responsibility to take care of them. All of your gifts and all of your abilities are on loan. Nothing is yours. All of your money, that's nothing more than an advance. You're not entitled to any money in this world. It's an advance. Your house, your cars, your clothes, every single possession that you've ever thought, this is mine. It's not. It's not yours. It belongs to God. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how responsible are you being to what God has given you? The second thing that I picked out was in verse 15, and it's, you're given what you can handle. In verse 15 it says, to one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. So I want to take a second to kind of put the talent, what he's talking about, into perspective, right? Prior to this last week, I knew I had seen this before, but I could not have given you any kind of realistic picture of what he was handing over. And what I was able to find kind of shocked me a little bit. So the word talent is basically a measure of weight. And it was also used, like in this case, as something to indicate a very large sum of money. Now, granted, it would basically vary on as far as what was in there. Copper, gold, silver would vary the value of it. And I couldn't find anywhere that said that there was an exact amount, but pretty much the theme that I saw, that it seemed like everybody I looked at agreed on, was a talent for a normal worker, basically equivalent to a minimum wage worker, was about 20 years worth of salary. So put that in today's numbers. Minimum wage, you're probably talking $300,000 or more. 1 talent would be equivalent to about $300,000. That's a lot for somebody to say, I'm going on a trip and I need you to manage this. So there's a direct correlation here as far as how we should be investing our own money, how we should be caring for our own money. That for me was personally kind of hard to hear, because I've been pretty poor at that most of my life. I've always thrown caution to the wind, and I have exactly what I deserve to show for how I've treated my money, how I've treated what God has given me. But you have to ask yourself, when it comes to that money, when you're entrusted with that kind of a gift, when God gives you that kind of a loan, how responsible are you being with it? And it reminded me, I used to go to church when I was younger, a lot younger, out in Medina, at Medina Community Church. And I heard this story once, and I remember laughing then, and I pretty much forgot this story until I was reading these verses. And it was a story about two guys that are in a plane, and they crash on a deserted island. And first guy gets out, he brushes himself off, and he starts running all over the island. He comes back to the second guy, and he's freaking. He was like, we're lost, dude. This is a deserted island. There's no food, there's no water, there is nothing. We're in trouble. The second guy, he's cool as the other side of the pillow. He just says, hey, it's cool. I make about $100,000 a week. We're good. First guy says, you're kidding me, right? There is nothing on this island, dude. There is nobody here. Nobody knows where we're at. We're lost. Second guy says, hey, it's fine. I make about $100,000 a week. We're good. This first guy grabs him by the shoulders and he's shaking him and he's basically going, your money doesn't mean anything on this island. There's nobody here to give it to. There's nobody here to render any services to us. Your money doesn't mean anything. We're going to die. The second guy says, listen, don't make me tell you again. I make about $100,000 a week, and I tithe 10%. I promise you my pastor is okay? So I want you guys to know that I'm not going to hammer on tithing right now. So, you know, put you at ease there. I would like to, for the guys that weren't here, or for guys and girls that weren't here last week, we did read in Acts where Silas and Timothy went to Paul and met up with him as he was, you know, preaching the Word of God, and they went to work and allowed him to preach 24/7 and not work, and they provided for him. And I talked a little bit about that last week, that our goal as a church should always be striving. We are not there, and that's not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing. We need to strive to, for as long as Steve is willing to pastor this church, to do whatever we can to meet his needs so that this can be his full-time and only job. And then the second thing is that if you do make that kind of money and you do start to tithe like that, I promise you, Steve will probably turn this world upside down. So we'll move on from there. Anyways, towards the end of verse 15, it does say that each servant received these talents according to his ability. And like I said, you know, your responsibility is tied to your ability. And we are given what we can handle. And kind of what the Spirit kind of pulled me to pull out of here is, and I'm guilty of this myself, and this, like Steve said, I've been stomping on my own toes all week long. But God's purposes do not operate according to what is fair, but according to what is best. There are many times in my life where I've thought, why am I losing this job? It's not about what's fair. I work harder than that person. It's not about what's fair. And it led me into 1 Corinthians 3:5, and I don't want to get too far off on a rabbit trail here, but I do want to kind of touch this a little bit, because this is something that when I got to it, hit me like a ton of bricks. To start in 1 Corinthians 3, it's talking about a division in the church. And this is the letter to the Corinthians. You know, Paul went in and he's planted this church, and then he moves on. And Apollos is left behind to preach and to continue to lead these people. And there comes a part where the people in the church start to say, you know, I'm not following Apollos, I want to follow Paul. Or, I don't want to follow Paul, I've been listening to Apollos this whole time. And in verse 5 it says, what after all is Apollos, and what is Paul? only servants, through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. Paul planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. That one hit me kind of hard this week because whether it's been myself, whether it's been, conversations with other people that are here now or have been here in the past, or even friends at other churches, there are a lot of times where I hear people say, and I've said it myself, I don't feel like I'm being fed. And if you look at 1 Corinthians 3, 5, and read through there, if your heart is right, if your eyes and your ears are open to God, and the person that is delivering a sermon is preaching out of the Bible, if you're not being fed, I would tell you the last place you need to look is the pulpit. The last place you need to look is the front of the church. The first place you need to look is in the mirror. And you need to look at what your life is like and where God is in it. Is he in the front of your life? Is he at the top? Or have you pushed him down and you put other things in front? If you're not being fed, if you don't feel like you're growing, I have a feeling that if you're really honest with yourself, it's not going to be because of the person at the front of the church. It also says there in 1 Corinthians 3:5 that we're all assigned a task. Each has been assigned a task. It's our job to be faithful to what he's given to us. And it's our job to be faithful to what he has given us to do. There are different kinds of things. Just in this room, when I see people that set up every Sunday morning, or when we're at block parties and we've got everybody and their sister, not everybody is wired to do the same kinds of things. You have what you have, like I said earlier, because of what God has given to you. And he expects you to manage those gifts and the abilities that he has wired you with. God gives people different stuff that they're going to be good at, and it's all going to be according to his perfect will. In other words, God knows what you can handle. God knows what you're capable of. And you have to ask yourself, do you trust that God knows you better than you know yourself? The third point is we must invest what we've been given. So verse 16 tells us that the first guy that received 5 talents went at once and put his money to work, and he gained 5 more. He doubled what he had. He didn't waste any time. Immediately he takes off, and he's going to work. The guy who had 2, he goes to work too. I did kind of notice, and I didn't dive into it, but it doesn't say he went at once, but it does say that he went to work. So I think there's a little bit of a difference there between those 2 guys. They're both faithful, but one is running on blind faith, and he is off like somebody lit his hair on fire. The second guy just goes to work and he's diligent. Both those guys double what their master had given them. Then going down to verse 18, we see a different approach. The guy that gets 1 is filled with a fear, and he goes off and he buries his talent. We don't read about any specific instructions. The master does not look at these guys and say, I want you to do A, B, C. He just gives it to them with the expectation that they're going to do what's in his best interest. And the first two guys do multiply that investment, it doubles. And the one guy, he's a slacker. He goes off and he buries it. And, you know, to point out as far as him burying it, that was actually pretty common back in that day. When you had something valuable, you would bury it. However, it was the least profitable thing you could do. When it's in the ground, nobody can use it, nobody can help you with it. It's buried and it's hidden. Our potential is God's gift to us. And what we do with that potential is our gift to God. There's nobody on this planet that can get as much out of their ability as you. Nobody can get more out of what you have than yourself. You have to ask yourself, are you investing what you've been given? Are you investing everything that God has entrusted you with? Have you invested everything that God has given you? And is God seeing a return on his investment? Or are you going to be like the third guy and bury it to where nobody can see it? For me, it's been tough the last 2 weeks to be up here, and to be quite honest, I don't get really excited when it comes my turn to sing. I'm not a horrible singer. I know I can sing okay. I'm not American Idol talent. I have a pretty realistic view of what I am, unless it's by his wounds, which I hear I'm pretty stellar at that.
11 views on YouTube.
Yeah, and thanks to Spinelli, there was a version of me singing on YouTube, which I have not figured out what my retaliation is going to be. I haven't. You're lucky I've been busy this last week because I haven't had time to think about it. You know, and I want to kind of confess something to you guys, because when I first started coming here, I never told anybody I could sing. Never told anybody I was in choir in high school. Never told anybody that I had, you know, sang in karaoke contests and actually won some money. And then my wife spills the beans. And I went on a 3-month hard press from Lori and a couple other people to get me up in front to sing. And I fought it and fought it and fought it, and then I finally got up here and I sang. Of course, the first time I sang, I actually was sweating about as bad as I am right now. But it got easier as I continued to push myself, as I continued to take. God has given me an ability to sing, okay, I'm not bad. And I had to push myself out of my comfort zone to do that on a regular basis. To the point now, Lori knows she can count on me whenever she needs me. I'm completely aware that I frustrate the snot out of her, because I have never, ever went, yes, I'm singing. I just go, okay. And I know that drives her nuts. So that's been a challenge for me. I have an ability, I have a gift, I have a talent that God has given to me, and I don't get excited about it. I'm nervous. I've got some anxieties, which that may surprise some people, but whether it's that or these last 2 weeks being in this spot, this isn't easy for me. This, you know, I'm thankful that God has continued to multiply within me the talents that he's given me, and continue to push me and stretch me, and just use me in more and more ways. So you have to ask yourself, what blessings, what talents, what gifts do you have that you're bearing? What are you hiding not only from God, trying to hide from God, which that is futile. There's no point in that. But what are you hiding from everybody else? The fourth point is that a day of accountability is coming. Being that this is a parable, and there is to be a direct correlation as far as this story and Jesus, him being here, leaving, and coming back. A day of accountability is coming. None of us want to be audited by the IRS or anybody else. None of us really thoroughly enjoy being accountable to even some of our closest friends. But there's going to come a day when you're going to have to give an account for how you've used everything that God has given you. Your money, your time, your talents, your treasures. And if we look at verse 19, it says, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled the accounts of them. So that tells us there's going to come a time when we're going to be asked some hard questions about what we did, how we did it. You know, question does this. And in 1 John 2:28, it says, now, dear children, continue in him so that when he appears, we may be confident and unashamed before him. I think it's important for everybody to serve in a light that one day you are going to be recognized. If you get into the habit of asking yourself, how will I manage my money? Or how will I make this decision to serve or not to serve? How is that going to look? If you're a Christian, if you belong to God, I'm confident you're going to see a change in some of the decisions you make. The fifth point is what we do, what we have, is going to reveal your view of God. Verses 20 through 25. The man who had received 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. The man with 2 talents also came. Master, he said, I entrust you. You entrusted me with 2 talents. I have gained 2 more. Master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. The man who had 1 talent who had received 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. So the first 2 guys, you see that they walk into the room with their master, and they're like, see, which is like, you know, that day probably was more closer to behold, or today, if you have children, it's more like, look. You know, there's this level of excitement, right? They were faithful with what their master had given them. They had gone out, they had done good things with it. They're excited. They're excited to show God what they've done with it. They're both just thoroughly thrilled and could not wait to get in front of the master to show him, look at what I've done. And that's the same with both of the first 2 guys. And the master is thrilled with both of them as well. They both demonstrated an ability, or demonstrated a responsibility for their ability. And he gives them both the exact same response. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful of few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. He's so happy with them that he tells them, this is the tip of the iceberg for you guys. You guys have proven that you're going to be faithful to me. You're going to do what's in my best interest. And as a reward for that, I want to give you more. And being that this is a parable, and being that there is a direct tie to Jesus for us, you can make a tie back to Luke 6:38, where it says, "Give, and it will be given to you." There's a few things here that these guys receive. They're faithful, and in return, the first thing they receive is affirmation. They get a great job. Well done. I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate your faithfulness. The second thing is they both get a promotion. Since you've done so well with what you've been given, I'm going to give you more responsibility and more opportunity for growth. And the last one is celebration. You've made me very happy. Let's celebrate together. You can kind of translate the well done to, excellent, maybe like a Bill and Ted, if you know that movie. I don't know that Jesus sounded just like that, but it'd be funny. Or excellent. They were faithful, and they were called good because they had a right view of their master. And likewise, because of this right view of their master, he asked them to come and celebrate with him. God is looking for faithful people to manage, who can properly manage resources for His purposes, not for yours. And when we're responsible, when we show God that we can be responsible for those things that He gives us, you will be given more. Be careful what you wish for, because it can lead you to where I'm standing. And if we have that right view of God, if we have that right view of Christ, I think much like you can hear a smile on the Master's face in this parable, I get excited about the fact that while I'm going to be ashamed for quite a bit of my life, that there are going to be more and more things as I move forward that I'll be able to look at Him, I'll be able to be righteously proud of, because I didn't do them for me, I did them for Him. And I look forward to seeing that smile back. Just like you can hear the smile on the Master's face, Jesus wants to smile at you when you're faithful with what He's given you. The other end of the spectrum is the one-talent guy. He comes a little bit more reluctantly, if you will. And he starts off by saying, I knew that you were a hard man. So if you compare just that very first part to the first two guys, right? The first two guys say, you entrusted me. The third guy says, I knew. And then goes on to talk about, I know you're a hard man. This third guy has a wrong view of who his master is. He sees him as somebody that's hard, probably sees him as maybe a jerk. I mean, he says harsh, but he's not the biggest fan of this guy who he calls master, who he serves, and who cares for him. Because back in those times we've talked before, where we're not talking days of slavery in the United States. We're talking when you were a servant back in these times, your master cared for you. He took care of your needs. These people were treated with respect. They weren't treated and whipped and They did work and they were taken care of. I stumbled across a quote from somebody named A.W. Tozer. Somebody said, because I didn't do the work to see who this guy was. But when I stumbled across his quote, it kind of floored me. He said, what we think about God is the most important thing about us. And like this third guy, if we view God as a tyrant, if we view him as hard, harsh, somebody that is filled with wrath, everything is going to get filtered through that lens. I know a few times with myself, and I'm using that loosely, and I know, she's not in here, I know my wife, when we first got married, this was a huge obstacle for us when we talked about church, when we talked about trying to find a home, a church home. And it's probably been true with everybody in this room from time to time. Sometimes you secretly get angry at God. Because something happened or didn't happen the way you wanted it to. And because of that, your view of God becomes skewed. Your preconceived notions prevent you from seeing a God of grace. And as a result, you start to refuse to serve Him and do the things that you should be doing. And when we do blame God, we'll find out that we're more like this third guy. You're going to take your talent and you're going to bury it. And when you get to that place, now you're going to find yourself in a place of excuses. And I've been there myself as well. In verse 25, he talks about the reasons why he didn't go running out like the first two guys did. He talks about being afraid of his master. He's paralyzed with fear. And because he's afraid, he decides to play it safe. He certainly doesn't want to come back to his master and say, yeah, well, I tried, I got nothing left. Like, not only did I not multiply, but I've lost it. So because of his fear, he buries it. And the funny thing is his goal was to not lose any money. And he accomplished that. But you have to remember, that's not hard. Because there's a saying I always used when I was coaching basketball this last year. You know, these kids not really wanting to set goals. Granted, they were 7th graders and you're just trying to get that into them. But the coaches would tell these kids from time to time, when you aim at nothing, you're going to hit every time. A wrong view of God always leads to fear. The third guy said, I was so afraid I went out and hid your talent in the ground. A right view of God leads to faith. And it shows the first two guys. They go out and they go to work. They're not afraid. You have to ask yourself, what's holding you back? I'm pretty sure not only in this church, but every church across the country, you're going to see the largest number of people be those that aren't using their talents. They're not using their abilities. And a lot of it's based on fear. Fear that I can I can relate to very much so when I first started singing, and very much these last 2 weeks. You know, last week when I was preparing, you know, I was so riddled with fear that even after I sat down with Steve the Thursday before and let him read my notes, and he got excited about what I had, and I felt excited about what I had, I still wouldn't commit to him, and I still made sure we had his video loaded up. Just in case, the last second, I want to pull the ripcord and say, no mas, I'm not. And I'm thankful that in that week while I was working and the extra praying I was doing, that God gave me the strength to get up here, not only last week, but with God's encouragement and Laura's encouragement, I'm here again. Since Laura didn't give me really much of a choice. And you have to remember that it takes courage to step out in faith, to use your abilities and use your gifts, to use your talents. And keep this in mind, courage is not an absence of fear. Courage is the ability to move ahead in spite of your fears, to fight through. Like I said a minute ago, those first two guys, especially that first guy, that was a lot of money. I mean, if we're doing the math, that would be the equivalent of $300,000 per talent today. That's $1.5 million. You telling me you wouldn't be afraid to have that much money given to you and trusted to you, and somebody expecting you to be faithful? I can't imagine those guys didn't have any fear in them. But I also think that we're shown here that they have the courage to step out in faith. And the biggest thing is they have the right view of their master. And again, being the parable, there should be a direct correlation with Christ. Do you have a right view of God? Do you have a right view of Christ? And are you stepping out in faith? So to look at the differences between these two through this whole thing, you know, the first two were determined to make a profit. The third was determined not to lose anything. The first two were willing to put in work. Work hard, take risks. The third, he ain't interested in risks. They were all given talents. They were all given a gift. The first two receive the gift and do something with it. The third one essentially refuses the gift. The first two, because of their right view of God, they want to advance what the Master has given to them. They want to grow. The third, he ain't worried about the Master. He's worried about his own tank. The first two guys saw it as an opportunity. The third guy sees it as a problem. The first two allowed that gift to change their lives because we see that they're given basically a promotion. The third refuses to let it touch his life. The first two invested, the last guy wastes. The first two see a blessing, the last guy sees a burden. The first two had a right view of God. The last guy didn't. The sixth point is we have to use what we've been given, or we risk losing it. Verse 26, the master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew I will harvest where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I return, I would have received it back with interest." Now, I don't know about you guys, but I read that, so you knew, with a little bit of sarcasm. He's looking at this guy saying, you don't know who I am. And he sees through the BS excuses that this guy's laying out in front of him. And he calls him a wicked, lazy servant. In other words, this guy's looking right at him and saying, you're lying. In your heart, you're basically a selfish, lazy boy. If you really wanted to do something, you would have put my money in the bank. He's basically saying, I see right through you. And again, being a direct correlation, being a parallel. Those are strong words. If you tie those words to Christ, if you tie those words to God, keep this in mind. God is not going to merely judge us for what we've done. We're also going to get judged for what we didn't do right. He calls him a wicked, lazy servant. And that wicked part, I think, has to do because he deliberately misrepresents both his master and himself. And like I said, when I read that, and I could be wrong, but I almost sensed some sarcasm there. I almost sensed a who do you think you are there? So you know? He falsely accuses that master of being harsh. Verse 25, it says, see, here is what belongs to you. So when the master leaves and he entrusts this guy with this talent, there's an expectation. Just like there is with everything that God has entrusted us with. He's doing that with an expectation. So, and here, this employer, this master, is expecting a return. And I thought it was very interesting that this third guy, after everything he's done, he's already walked away from his talent, he's buried it in the ground, he saw it as a problem, he wasn't interested in it touching his life. He screwed up. And even still at the end, he's not wanting to own it. And he behaves in a manner that there's a sense there that master should have went, oh, well, hey, thanks for not losing it. Thanks for not losing it. Right? Like burying it and not losing it was enough. When he says wicked and lazy, I think those things are going to partner together to keep a lot of people. I'll tell you what, you got hearts all over this. Next time, try not to do them through the words. But anyways, wicked and lazy, they partner together to many times to keep people from surrendering. Again, their time, their talents, and their treasures. While those other two servants were working hard and they were staying busy, the third guy, he digs a hole. He's selfish, he's a sluggard. He's not realizing that he dug that hole for himself. Selfish heart, coupled with an unwillingness to do anything about it. There are a lot of people in my life that I see on a daily basis, whether at work or in my personal life, that I see that a lot. I don't believe that they are my brothers or sisters in Christ. And after reading through these verses and preparing these notes, it scared me to out of me. Because when you have laziness and wickedness, when you have a selfish heart and an unwillingness to do anything about it, you are set straight on the path down. And there's too many people in my life that I would rather spend eternity with. You know, we all have an element of laziness in us. Mine is visible through my front porch. That was a joke. That's what that feels like, Steve?
Yeah.
Nice. This front porch right here.
If you have to explain it, just
keep going.
Yeah. Got some laughs there.
You know, and I thought the laziness, and I see my son all the time. I want him to go outside and play and climb trees like I did with a kid. Instead, he wants to stay inside and play video games all the time. That's laziness. Well, maybe not for my son because he jumps around like a pogo stick. But I remember there was a time, I don't remember how long ago this was, but I remember reading an article where Nintendo was trying to hire like 50 people, interns, to do summer work. They were going to pay them $100 a day. They wanted one thing: sit in a room, play video games. I don't know how you interested? Yeah. The problem is that level of laziness can be extremely dangerous when you're talking about your spiritual life. If you're at that level of laziness, what time belongs to God? I've always been a king of procrastination, and so I'm always somebody that says, there's some eyes dark in this room with people. So obviously I'm not the only one. But the fear when you procrastinate, when you put stuff off, the reason why it's dangerous is because there may come a point where it's going to be too late if you don't pay attention. Because the third guy didn't use what he had been given, he lost it. Verse 28, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. We're not supposed to hold on to what we've been given. We're supposed to develop it, build upon it, multiply it. And you do that by using those things that you've been given. The last thing is who you know is either going to lead to happiness or agony in the next life. Verse 29. We've seen earlier where those who have been faithful with a few things will have an abundance or an excess. On the other hand, those who bury their blessings risk facing agony. Jesus sums this up at the end by saying that this worthless servant is going to be thrown outside into the darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's not the first time we see that phrase, the weeping and gnashing of teeth. The other time we see it is when it's given as a description of hell. Those who don't know God, they're not going to serve Him. A lack of serving is going to be an indication that that person does not belong to Christ. That's why this guy's referred to as worthless. If you belong to Christ, you have worth. You have value. If you don't, Jesus refers to this guy as worthless. Distinguishing mark between a true Christian is going to be, service and giving. And I wrote down that a Christian that doesn't give and doesn't serve, by definition, is a contradiction. So I think I've talked long enough. I see some people starting to nod off. So we'll sum this up. Stewardship is best defined as the use of God-given resources for accomplishing God-given goals. There were 7 things that we kind of touched on. How do you line up? When you look in the mirror, what's your scoreboard look like? We talked about what we have is not ours. Do you make that correlation? And do you make your decisions based upon that fact? We're given what we can handle, which means we may feel uncomfortable. We may not enjoy certain things. For me, I need to be better at it. I don't show a lot of joy to Lori or anybody else when it's my turn to sing, for own anxiety reasons. But I have to trust that God knows me better than I know myself. And I have to trust that I'm given what I can handle. Then there was, we must invest what we've been given. Are you building on what God has placed in your life? Then we touched on the fact that a day of accountability is coming. Are you moving through life knowing that one day, just like when I look at my son and I say, "Son, look me in the eyes," Jesus is going to look at you, and even though you're going to want to hang your head, he's going to want you to look him in the eyes. Are you going to make him smile like the first 2 servants did to their master? The next thing we talked about was what we do with what we have reveals our view of God. And to me, that was a good one. I like that part because it'll definitely put you in check. If you're honest with it when you're looking in the mirror, it will put you in check. Are you bugging because things are bad? And are you blaming God? If you are, you're wrong. What we have, we must use or we'll lose. In this parable, he takes what he's given to that third guy and gives it to people that have been responsible. And the last one was, who you know will either lead you to abundance in Christ or agony in hell in the next life. Jesus has placed his business into your hands. We are going to be judged for our faithfulness. And the question that you guys should be asking yourselves when you leave here today is, are you partnering with him or are you full of excuses? Amber, if you want to come on up. We're going to close with a couple songs, and we're going to respond to God. Like always, the communion is in the back. If you're a Christian,